my name is Claire Gardill, and I will be discussing hate crimes. Particularly, what we're going to focus on is the different theories that explain hate crimes, why people commit hate crimes, and different things like that. We will also talk about what exactly hate stands for and what exactly hate crimes are defined as. We know that prosecuting hate crimes are extremely hard to do just because it is up to the prosecutor as well as the police department to prove that the individual committed the crime, such as assault, battery, robbery, due to who that person is, ethnically, racially, sexually, along those lines of any type of minority. It's very hard to prove just because we're talking about motives. We're talking about the real deep-seated issue why they did that. A lot of it is you have to prove that they have a bias against somebody or this specific group that they attacked to then show that what they did was a hate crime and it was motivated by their prejudice and their spite for a certain group. Understand not only are hate crimes hard to prosecute and what a hate crime truly is and what it looks like, it's also important to understand the theories behind hate crimes. By that I mean, why does somebody hate a particular group or a race, ethnicity, anything like that? Where does that come from? Where does that hate stem from? Where do we get that hate? Is it social learning? Is it through generational? What causes people to hate? And what causes individuals to act on that hate? A huge part with that is understanding where that hate comes from, understanding what motivates that hate, and understanding what motivates committing an act of hate against somebody else. It's very important that we understand those and know those while looking at hate crimes and how can we prevent them? How can we strengthen the bonds of our society so we don't commit hate crimes? How do we get our society to a point where differences, they don't exist as much? Or where can we go from here to allow this cohesive environment where we aren't hating somebody else because of their skin tone, their religious preferences, their sexual preferences, anything like that? Once we understand why somebody does that, we can best then figure out how to correct the issue. How can we make it better for everybody involved? How can we change the thinking of certain individuals and move it from a hate and prejudice viewpoint into something that is more cohesive and kind and treating each other just as what we are as human beings? Now we're just going to kind of move on to the basics of hate. What is hate? What does hate mean? How does one begin to hate? Where does that come from? So according to Alport, in 1954, hate is defined as an emotion of extreme dislike or aggression, impulses towards a person or group. Now, with this, not only does this definition kind of go in towards just the feeling, but also it takes it to the point where it involves the aggression that can evolve into physical violence and physical showing of hate. And when we look at hatred, also with the definition of hate, Fitz and Margot of 1997 viewed hatred as an extreme form of pathology, as a choice, a willed decision to think about a hurt and create the cognitive structures necessary to build resentment and anger that may be returned to and reflected upon over time. Now, this is in contrast to anger, where anger is more of that immediate reaction. Hate is kind of what we all kind of heard hate is. It's just something that bubbles up inside you. And it could be, because somebody treated you horribly. In the context that we're talking about it, it's this hatred of somebody that can't control their sexuality. They can't control their race, their ethnicity. A lot of the times when religion comes into it, sometimes religion isn't a choice, but sometimes it is. And the belief within how we want to worship should be safe from judgment, criticism, or just plain abuse or prejudice. The FBI also divides hate into rational hate, inspired by injustice, and irrational hate, based on a person's race, religion, sexual orientation, ethnicity, and national origin. The FBI definition, hate crimes or that hate motivation is based off just bias. And a lot of times those keep with the hatred and don't choose to go with forgiveness or try to forgive has a lot to do with the appeal, power, and stability of hatred. Along with that, though, I think it's hard for humans and human nature to accept change, to accept different viewpoints. And that's really what we're going to get into in a majority of the theories is some of individuals in the world, some human nature is to preserve your own, to protect yourself. And sometimes this hatred or this protection of oneself can evolve into hatred when the perception that another group is moving in to harm yourself, your group, or those that you relate to the most. So it's all these different components, a lot of different things, but it just comes back to the human nature and the perception of how we feel, as well as what we're taught, how we're raised, the community that we're raised in. A lot of these things influence our ability to hate, as well as the focus of our hate. And just talk about why we like and dislike, why do we love and why do we hate, where does that really stem from, where does that begin, how does it all start? Now, and according to our text, liking somebody or an individual's ability to relate and like somebody else is due to how we correlate ourselves with this person. As a blonde, I could see another blonde person and say, oh, you're blonde. We have that in common. I relate to you. I have this camaraderie with you already just because of a simple feature that correlation might not happen with someone with brown hair because they're different. So in generational, we talk about sticking to our own. And by that, I mean we just stick to the things that we know. We stick to the environments that we know. We stay in areas where we know. We hang with people that we know. We hang with people that are most comfortable to us. You'll see in a lot of times in schools that have some sort of division. I know in my high school we were very, very diverse. It was a very diverse area. And my elementary school, Caucasians were counted as a minority just because there would have been 3 of us in a class and everybody else is of a different race, ethnicity, anything like that. And in high school, you really see that division when you bring all of the local elementary and middle schools together is a lot of the groups stick with who they most identify with. So with that, as an example, you'll see a lot of whites with whites, blacks with blacks, Hispanics with Hispanics. And that's just because on many levels, there could be a cultural affiliation, a looks affiliation, struggles, or that person can relate to you more because of what they have gone through growing up. And that's what's really the basis of all of this. And it's where we kind of look at we shy away from those that are different. We shy away from diversity because it is scary. It is scary to look at something new. Going back to West Virginia, it was very different for me as someone who's from right outside of DC. It was very different to see the different types of talk, you know, when we talk about race, especially with Hispanics and Blacks. And most of the time, it's just because individuals in West Virginia weren't exposed to these different races, these different ethnicities. So when something changed, or there might be a new student who happens to be African American, that they shy away from that person because they don't understand. They don't relate to this person. They don't know how to relate to them. And that kind of goes on to the more familiar you're with somebody, your anxiety decreases. And again, the more unfamiliar you are with somebody, the more your anxiety increases. So it's a lot about how we look at each other and the relationship that we have with one another. So when we're going through it, we see a lot of the times, you know, children will become friends with pretty much anybody, to be honest. But as someone gets older, they want to gravitate towards people that they relate to. In middle school, you'll see a lot of children kind of choose their friends, pick and choose. And a lot of the time, it's those that look like them, those that represent what they represent. You know, at this point in time, we're growing in our personalities and we're listening more to our surroundings and the environment that we are living in. So it changes how we view things and it changes how we relate to things. So that is one of the foundations of where hate comes from. It's not knowing. They're different. It's unfamiliar to us. And that can correlate into anxiety, fear, and it's the fear of the unknown. It's the anxiety of the unfamiliar. So we start with that. And then from there, we talk about love versus hate. Now, Sternberg had a theory of hate, and he relates it to his theory of love. He stated that love and hate are not opposites. They have a complex relationship. So in his triangular theory of love, he has 3 points, 3 factors that relate into it. The first is passion, and it's that intensity, it's that desire, it's that wanting. Next is intimacy, which intimacy is that closeness. It's truly getting to know somebody for who they are. And commitment. It's the decision to be committed to somebody, a group of friends, a partner for life. It's the decision to say, I want to be with this person and I commit myself, and we're going to go through life and go through all the problems that life has together, and we're making that commitment to one another. With the triangle of hate, we'll go from intimacy to the negation of intimacy, or the distance between two individuals. It's the spreading apart. Next, rather than passion, is more of that fear or anger, that intensity of fear and anger that it can be. And lastly, rather than commitment, there is a contempt from the devaluation or diminishment of an individual as being a human being, meaning that it's looking at somebody as being less than human. It's putting them in the category of not being on the same playing field. And we'll see that a lot when it comes to specifically races. And when we talk about race and hate crimes, it really devolves into making someone feel less than what they are based on race, based on sexuality, based on religious beliefs, based on all these things. And that's just not true. the diminishment of somebody as a human being is really kind of where a lot of it comes from. And you'll hear people talk like that. Oh, they're less than human, or they're just this, or they're just that, not recognizing them as having feelings and having their own personality traits and being a whole person. They're viewed upon based off the group view, or, just because one person is bad, then they're all bad. Have an idea of the definition of hate, and the small starting points of how hate can build and really what it stands for, we can move into several different theories. The first theory that we're going to discuss is the social identity theory. Now, that is the act of dividing people into groups, leads people to prefer their own group and attributes positive attitudes towards it. So this is where your social identity, kind of like what we talked about before, of like your traits, your personality traits, how you grew up, where you live, all of those different things go into individual's identity and what kind of makes them who they are. Excuse me. So it suggests that an individual's identity is derived from both social identity, or the attributes of the groups in which they belong, and their personal identity and unique characteristics. And those are just the things that kind of bond us together. And this also goes into, we talk about self-esteem. Your self-esteem is derived from their evaluations. It's feeling good about their group, the accomplishments associated with their groups, and it helps us maintain this positive self-image. We show favoritism to our own group. When you're a part of something, you like that, and everything else you might not have a negative attitude towards, but it's not as great as yours. And again, you'll see that with like sports teams, or if you participated in sports where you thought your team was the greatest and the other team wasn't as good or didn't put in enough effort like yours did. So the more positive relationship that you have with your own group can lead to more negative feelings about the out groups. And that was actually done by a sheriff in 1966. He went on to observe boys at a summer camp that were broken up into two groups, and these boys were supposed to go through a competition, and whoever made it to the end, or the winning team, would get a prize and get some other things like that. And he had noticed that as the boys go on through the competition, and event by event by event, they see this increase in the group, and more cohesiveness, and the more positivity in that group, but also could see the increase in the negative views, the negative connotations, the negative speech towards the other team. And it was based on competition. And this kind of goes into our next theory. It's the realistic group conflict. And that's where we look for, it argues that competition for scarce resources that leads to animosity develops between groups, as well as the development that leads to positive evaluations of one's own group and negative evaluations of the out group. And a lot of this is, you're looking for survival. It's human nature to find out how to survive. It's human nature to try to survive at whatever cost. And we see that can also cause prejudice and, When the settlers came to America, they took over the land of the Native Americans due to the scarcity of resources. The colonists wanted what the Native Americans had. It was the land, it was the resources. They wanted to know how to navigate. They wanted all of these things that the Native Americans had or flourished in, and they perceived them as different from their own, and also taking away their resources or feeling as though they have to compete for those resources. So that's where we kind of see this group theory of we are better or we're better than them, us versus them. We see a lot of that. And this also goes into fostering the justification of why our group deserves more. Why are we so much better? And it provides a justification for taking those resources. So with those two, with social identity and the realistic group conflict, it really lays down a foundation. And I think once you think about it in your everyday life, and that's a question to pose for yourselves, is what have you noticed when you've been on a sports team or an academic team or anything like that, a family competition, board games, anything like that? What do you notice? How do you notice? What's going on that increases the group whole positivity while also putting up a negative view of the out group? And that's something to think about, just because that's the basis. That's kind of where we kind of build with these other theories, is starting there, and then we'll move forward. Next theory that we're going to talk about is relative deprivation. Now, this is in addition to prejudice and hatred stemming from competition over scarce resources. Animosity between groups can also stem from the perception that one's group is not faring as well as it should be relative to another group. So we look at how one group may be doing better than your own, and there's that you're not doing as well as you should be, and why is that? This also can occur when it comes to one's own group that is doing well. You can also see that relative deprivation even when your group's doing well. The main point of relative deprivation is feeling that one's group is not doing as well as it should to be expected in comparison to other groups. Now, these can cause feelings that individual must search for someone to blame for what they're missing, why they aren't faring so well. And an example of that is this skit that was done on South Park, where they were talking about the loss of jobs to Hispanics, and it's that they took our jobs type, but it's not that they took their jobs. It's, the employment or what jobs these certain people are looking for. They don't want to just cut grass. And that's where that kind of negative view is, or where that kind of stems from is, individuals, especially during economic downhills, they look for reasons as to why they're out of jobs. Not because there could have been some bad trades or something to do with the government. They look at things that they feel as though they can control, and they feel as though they can blame on a certain group, and not just as the industry as a whole. a lot of the times back in the Great Depression, you'll see that a lot of the blame for the Great Depression was turned towards the Jewish population, that they were at fault for this. So in times of where a lot of resources aren't being shared about, or resources that you did have are now diminished, it allows someone to put a face to the blame. It allows someone a direction to put their anger and aggression towards, whether it's that group or that person's fault. It doesn't really matter, but it matters to the individual of that thinking that it is this certain race's fault. It's the Hispanics' fault for taking our jobs, even though in reality, the economy is doing worse and the industry that you might have been in is suffering, and you choose not to want to do certain jobs that you feel are beneath you. And when we have individuals come in that do those jobs, there's that increase in like, what? Like, they took our jobs. Like, why are they here? I don't even have a job, but they have a job. And it has nothing to do with that, but it allows, or it gives somebody a face to blame. It gives somebody the reason as to why they're not faring as well as others. We're going to kind of move into hate-inspired action, and we discuss the different theories that attribute to what factors are necessary for the feeling of hate, or the thinking of hate, to move from just a thought process to physical action, to the point where we want to physically harm the group that we hate. One of the first theories is strain theory. I think strain theory is talked about a lot when it comes to criminal activity, and understanding of why people sometimes do what they do. With this, it's the capitalist society that have established goals for attaining wealth, power, and prestige. In these societies, the goals of achieving those are laid out. In modern day, we look at, going to college, then getting your master's, and then getting into your field. And you can move up that way, and you can attain wealth if you go to college. And if you do all these things, you can get the norm of how society wants you to get that wealth and prestige. With the strain theory, it also talks about how one of the reasons people commit crimes is because they don't have the normal pathway to achieve those goals, and they have blocks in their pathway. And a lot of that comes down to socioeconomic classes, where somebody lives, the opportunities that they have, the knowledge that they are given, the options that they are given. And that's really where the strain comes from, is someone's going to commit crimes to obtain that wealth, the prestige, the power that they want, they desire, they must have. So they find other ways to do it. They find other ways to get that, and a lot of the time it has to do with criminal activity. Next, we're going to talk about the reformulated frustration and aggression hypothesis. This is, it suggests when goals are thwarted, people experience negative feelings, which then can lead to emotional aggression. Violence is predicted by the strain theory, and this kind of go hand in hand, where it's the goals that someone is reaching for, that wealth, that prestige, that power that they would like, they can't get to it the way society wants them, or the way that society has paved out. And with that, it can cause a lot of aggression, feelings of fear, feelings of hurt, anger, that they aren't given the same opportunities to achieve the same. And the reformulated frustration aggression hypothesis really indicates any negative event that leads to unpleasant feelings can lead to anger. So, an event, a moment in time that leads to negative feelings can lead to aggression. And aggression could lead into getting that aggression out through physically, verbally, that strain or that feelings of getting blocked from reaching the goals. We kind of move into situational elements that can influence aggression. Situational elements may make aggression more or less likely. It also is factors related to people involved or elements of an immediate situation or a larger culture. First, we kind of want to look at leaders and followers. How does someone become a leader of a hate group? Or how does someone incite violence as a leader? And it goes down into the charismatic nature of the leader, the social dominance or the authoritarianism that a leader has. When we look at some of the major leaders in the world, and specifically those that have incited hate, such as Hitler, we kind of see where that authoritarianism and the high dominance comes in. He spoke with conviction and belief in himself, and it made others believe in what he was saying. His charisma engaged people. It made them feel a certain way. And that's how these sort of things work, is total authority leads, and it can lead into prejudice and aggression. It's the authoritarianism is they obey their leaders, including going along with acts of violence or aggression towards some people or groups. And that behavior is either encouraged, sanctioned, or in some instances asked of for them. So when just looking at Hitler, I mean, he controlled all of Germany, and he brought in ways to harm others that were different from him. I mean, he wanted blonde-haired, blue eyes, and he turned a whole country against select fews, the mentally disabled, the gypsies, the Jews. He did all of these things because of this hatred that he had. And he had this total authority, this charisma, this dominance about him that led him to power. And we'll see a lot of that, of examples like Hitler that are able to do that. I mean, you see in a lot of countries in South America that are going through situations, Cuba, or what Cuba did go through, were, these individuals coming to power in a moment in the country's time where they were really suffering. And when you promise all these things and you make it sound good and you make it believable, it makes people believe in what you're saying. It's like, oh my gosh, they're speaking great. They're doing what I want them to do. And at that point, they kind of rope you in by their propaganda, anything like that, and then influence you to commit hatred or hold hatred against somebody. In 2016, when Trump became president, within the first 10 days, there was over 200 acts of violence of white individuals toward minorities. And it's not because of Trump specifically. He didn't say go out there and harm these people. But the way that he has put things, the way he has spoken, he has given his following a truth to look for, or that things aren't as great as they could be due to these certain groups. You know, that all Hispanics are rapists and murderers. And then it allows people to say, oh, yeah, he is. They are. And can act upon that. That hatred is they hearing the things that they either have had within them, or again, we go to that strain where there's these certain aspects that disallows individuals to reach this prestige, the power, the wealth. So when somebody, a leader of that, states that the issue is because of these other races, these minorities, these individuals, they're the reason why we're not prospering. And that instills, or it begins, this bubble of hatred. And the more that this is spoken of and this is pumped out and this passionate speech continues, the more people get riled up. And that kind of takes us into our next kind of theory is the de-individualization. And that is to suggest that people in a crowd regress to a primitive level of behavior, losing their rationality and individual to a group mind. You'll also see this definition in correlation to the mob effect and, individuals that perform or participate in a mob, they lose their sense, they lose themselves to the group, and the rationality of what they're doing is out the window. A lot of the times, regardless of an individual's part as a group, is the reason for that, is the loss of identity or change in identity. And that goes to when a leader is advocating for violence toward an outgroup, the members of the crowd will act aggressively toward that outgroup. And again, you'll see that when Trump came into office or at some of his rallies. He told, get him out of here. And then individuals in the crowd started attacking that individual. They lost who they were because their leader created this environment where you just kind of get lost in these individuals. So a lot of the time with that, it also can be shift in not that they lost their identity, but goes into the low self-control. Low self-control can cause a person to act on their hateful emotions. With this, there is correlation that Walters in 2010 had stated that self-control, low self-control, has a correlation to the commission of crimes. And this is also the general theory of crime. Individuals to different degrees are able to control their impulses, delay gratification, or resist temptation. It is argued that individuals who are low in self-esteem have less of an ability to do these things and therefore are more likely to act on their urges and engage in behavior that motivate crimes. So we kind of look at the loss of identity to a group and the low self-control, that ability to stop yourself from doing something. And that kind of goes, again, into the mob mentality. It's we're a group, we're one, they can't get us all. I'm gonna, break all these things because I can, and who's gonna stop me? We also, another factor when it comes to hate is the revenge norm. This is where people seek revenge for a perceived or actual wrongdoing committed by a targeted group. It is common in several cultures, and it's consistent with the idea that if one out-group member committed a crime against the in-group, everybody in the out-group is classified as the enemy or someone to seek revenge on. This goes into the us versus them, and it kind of the group, a certain group is identified as the enemy. And if that's the case, if one group is identified, the in group will attack that out group, whether it's the actual person who committed the crime or just the group that they're perceived to be in. That hate goes towards it. And with that, you'll see a lot of, hate with gays. You'll see a lot of that with, back in the day when being gay wasn't acceptable or as acceptable. They would go to bars, in certain bars, and those individuals would feel like their bar is getting taken away from them, and they would exact revenge and go after these people due to the perceived nature, and whether it's the person that actually hurt them or just the group as a whole, because they think that if you hit one person or if you attack one person, then that impacts the group as a whole. And in a sense, it does. It does, and especially over time, it creates this fear, or it creates this anguish that is generational. Is it necessary to understand the theories and the reasonings behind hate crime? When we understand these theories and we understand the potential thinking process as to why someone does a hate crime or that hatred is formed, we can then prevent it. Or we can try to change a society and the way they view and the way they think. With knowing the cause or the potential cause allows us a chance to prevent or assist in correcting that crime or correcting that hatred. Along with that, we look at of the many different theories that we have. We can look at those and figure out how do we change or how do we make these certain situations better. What in our ability can we do as a society to thwart this hatred and these hate crimes and the reason that people feel the way that they do. A lot of it, if you can look back and think, it's a lot of this anger and this aggression and the feeling of loss, or the feeling that something's being taken away, or the feeling that they're behind. And I think, in a sense, everybody can relate to that feeling, whether you feel like you're behind in life, that it took you 6 years to graduate college versus your friends who did it in 4 years, or the friends that did it in 3 years. It's this perception that others are doing better than us. And that can lead into this deep-seated aggression, and specifically towards one group, where you feel like these individuals are getting ahead, and taking your resources and making it more difficult for you to achieve wealth and prestige. And a lot of the times, and a lot of the theories that we discussed, it seemed as though it had a lot to do with one's belief in themselves and the expansion of their belief system. And that's one of the most difficult parts with human nature, is trying to change that and change a thinking, and letting people know that just because your life isn't going like X, Y, and Z over there doesn't necessarily mean that you are behind or that someone's better than you. And with that, with those feelings that this group is better than you, or you have this anger towards them, leads into this aggression, this unfair treatment, this prejudice, based on a perception that might not even be true. And when we have leaders who speak with strong levels of hate or strong levels of prejudice, it makes individuals feel that they're allowed to say these things. They're allowed to do these things because they have a leader that told them they could and told them that they should. That it's not your fault for how things have turned out, but it's all these other people's fault. It's putting blame onto somebody else and directing that anger and that aggression towards somebody, rather than taking that step back and evaluating it and offering to forgive yourself and forgiveness towards those. That would decrease that hatred, that anger, that aggression. But again, people find comfortability in it, the stability of it. And a lot of times that can increase hate, and it can increase this group mindset of hate. Hate can bond people together. It has this way of taking over, and we need to discuss how we can do that. So I end this presentation on asking you. You know all the theories now. We've talked of everything. What do you think would be the best policy on changing hate? How do we end hate crimes? How do we just end hate? And how do we prevent leaders that are proponents of this hate or prejudice or the restriction of diversity? How do we resist allowing them to get into power? So, what can we do? So I will thank you for listening, and I look forward to any questions or opportunities to have a debate.